Marcus Ellison was just mopping the hallway when the math teacher stopped class, pointed at him, and laughed. "Why don't you solve this calculus problem, janitor?" The class erupted. Marcus didn't flinch. He stared at the board, then walked up with the mop still in hand. What he wrote next didn't just silence the room. It shook the entire school. But what no one knew, this wasn't the first time Marcus had been erased. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The scent of industrial cleaner lingered in the air as Marcus Ellison moved quietly through the hallway, mop gliding in steady rhythm across the polished linoleum. It was third period at Langston Preparatory Academy, a private high school in Atlanta with ivy climbing its red brick facade, and the kind of legacy that came from old money and even older prejudice. Marcus, the school's janitor for the past 6 years, had long since learned how to make himself invisible, not out of fear but survival. He was tall, in his late 40s, with calloused hands and shoulders that carried more weight than just the cleaning supplies. Students often passed him by without a glance, and teachers rarely acknowledged his presence. He didn't expect more. Not here, especially not from someone like Mr. Ryan Halpern. Room 207, Advanced Calculus. Marcus pushed the janitor cart inside as he always did during third period. The plan was simple: mop the back of the room, keep quiet, don't interrupt. But today was different. Mr. Halpern, the math teacher, was feeling bold. His class of mostly affluent white juniors laughed easily at his sarcastic comments, eager to impress. He wore his condescension like cologne, thick and offensive. As Marcus dipped the mop in the bucket, Halpern turned to the board and scribbled an equation. "All right, hotshots, let's see who can handle this beauty," he said with a smirk. "Multivariable limits. Real nasty stuff." He paused for dramatic effect, then turned around slowly, eyes landing on Marcus. "Hey, Marcus, since you're standing there like you know math, why don't you come up and solve it for us?" Silent. Marcus looked up. His eyes, dark and calm, met Halpern's. For a moment the room froze. Then came the laughter. It started with one student, then another, and another, a rolling wave of mockery. Some leaned forward, delighted by the cruelty. Others looked away awkwardly. One girl, the only black student in the room, kept her eyes on Marcus, her expression unreadable. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't fumble. He didn't protest. He simply looked at the board, then back at Halpern, then turned away and resumed mopping. "Guess not," Halpern said, chuckling to himself. "Back to work then." The class moved on, but something had shifted. The laughter faded, but a strange tension settled like dust. Marcus didn't look back, didn't defend himself, but deep in his chest, something old stirred, something he had buried long ago. As he reached the classroom door, mop bucket in tow, he paused. There was a subtle change in his posture, a straightening of the spine, a quiet defiance. Without a word, he set the mop aside and walked to the chalkboard. The room went silent again. Even Halpern looked confused. Marcus took the chalk in hand. The board was still filled with Halpern's problem, a complicated limit question, designed to stump even high-level students. He didn't hesitate. His hand moved smoothly across the board, unraveling the equation with surgical precision. His strokes were quick, confident, deliberate. The students watched in stunned silence as lines of logic unfurled, symbols danced into harmony, and numbers bent to his will. In less than a minute, the problem was solved. Marcus stepped back, set the chalk down gently on the tray, and turned to face the class. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The room was frozen in disbelief, and then, just as quietly as he'd stepped forward, Marcus walked out of the room. Halpern blinked. "Wait, what did he—" He turned to the board, eyes scanning. His mouth dropped open. The solution was correct. Not only correct, it was elegant, efficient, impossible to fake. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the black girl in the second row, her name was Alana James, leaned forward. "Mr. Halpern," she said quietly, "how come the janitor just solved the problem you said was too hard for us?" Halpern didn't answer. Because on the board underneath the final boxed answer, Marcus had written something in small, neat print. "Real knowledge doesn't need credentials. Only opportunity." Halpern took a shaky step back from the board, only to notice that the equation Marcus had solved wasn't even the one he had originally written. It was harder. Much harder. The chalk dust still clung faintly to Marcus Ellison's fingers, as he closed the maintenance closet door that afternoon. The building was quieter now. Students shuffled to lunch or off-campus electives, the buzz of teenage energy momentarily gone. But Marcus's mind was not still. The silence inside him, the kind he had worked years to preserve, had been cracked. He had never intended to solve that equation. He hadn't planned to touch the board, to expose a piece of who he was. But something about that laugh, Halpern's smug amusement, the student's eager cruelty, it peeled something raw and unhealed inside him. Because Marcus Ellison wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a man who knew calculus. He was once known in certain academic circles as the mind MIT couldn't keep. 15 years ago, Marcus had stood on the precipice of history. He was just 23 when he submitted a thesis proposal that nearly rewrote a branch of nonlinear dynamics. But brilliance couldn't shield him from the weight of perception. There were whispers about how he'd gotten in. Questions about whether affirmative action had given him a leg up. His advisor, Dr. Gaffney, praised him in private but rarely backed him publicly. And Marcus, young and black and burning with the pressure of being exceptional, internalized it all. He believed that if he just proved himself with numbers, cold, undeniable truth, he'd be safe. Then came the scandal. It started with a problem set. One of Marcus's doctoral students had plagiarized a portion of a collaborative draft they'd worked on together. The document ended up in another student's thesis work. When the plagiarism was discovered, it traced back to Marcus. The institution didn't investigate deeply. They didn't ask who had really written what. They didn't consider that Marcus's notes had been stolen, left in a shared lab, borrowed and misused. They just saw a young black man, whose work was now under scrutiny. MIT placed Marcus under academic probation, and within a semester his funding was pulled, his name quietly removed from publications, and his future erased. He was told he could appeal, but the process dragged on for months. His name was already mud in the academic world. Job offers disappeared. Interviews were canceled. Friends stopped returning his calls, and Marcus, who had never once been accused of wrongdoing, watched as his identity unraveled. He packed up what little he had, left Boston, and returned to Atlanta. He never told his mother the truth. He couldn't. She had sacrificed too much, worked too hard cleaning houses, ironing shirts, and praying every Sunday that her son would make it out. So he lied. Said he wanted a break from all the pressure. Said he needed time to figure out his next move. Then he took a job with the school district, quietly cleaning the same kinds of hallways he used to walk with ambition. Until today. Now the classroom buzz wouldn't leave him. The way the room had fallen silent when he picked up the chalk, the stunned eyes, Halpern's confusion, he told himself it meant nothing. Just a moment. A flare. It wouldn't change anything. Except something had changed. That evening, after the building had cleared out, Marcus found himself once again in room 207. It was muscle memory, at this point. He emptied the trash cans, straightened the chairs, but then, without even realizing it, he walked to the board. There was still chalk dust on the ledge. He stared at it. He knew he shouldn't, but the pull was too strong. He picked up the chalk, and this time he didn't just solve a problem. He wrote one. Something he had carried in his mind for years. Unsolved. Unspeakable. A calculus conundrum involving rate of change across collapsing variables in real time. An abstract, elegant monster. He hadn't even attempted it since MIT. Lines of logic sprawled across the board. He paused, rechecked, then kept going. And then behind him, a quiet shuffle. He turned. In the doorway stood Alana James, the student who hadn't laughed. She said nothing. Just stood there, stunned. Marcus's hand froze halfway to the board. You shouldn't be here this late. Alana's voice was soft. I could say the same to you. Marcus stared at it. Delete that. She hesitated. You're not just a janitor, are you? Marcus sighed and lowered the chalk. I'm not who you think I am, and that video could change everything. She finished. He looked at her. Really looked. She couldn't have been more than 17, but her eyes held something rare, understanding, respect. Marcus didn't answer. He walked past her, down the hallway, back into the silence he had chosen long ago. Later that night, Alana sat in her bedroom, replaying the footage. She watched his hands. The way he solved a puzzle no one in school could. The way he didn't boast or explain or seek attention. The quiet power of a man who had been dismissed, but was never defeated. And then she uploaded the video. No caption. Just watch what our school's janitor just did. Unreal. She didn't expect what came next. By midnight it had 1,000 views. Then 10,000. By sunrise, local news had picked it up. The comments exploded. Who is this guy? That's real talent. We need to know his story. At 7:12 a.m., Marcus's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. The voice on the line said, "Mr. Ellison, this is Dr. Gerald Lockwood. We need to talk, urgently." By Monday morning, Langston Prep felt like a school on the edge of something. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but students were already gathering in clusters outside the main entrance, their faces lit by glowing screens. Phones passed from hand to hand, all playing the same viral clip. Marcus Ellison in his janitor's uniform, calmly solving a calculus equation that had left even their top students speechless. No one had seen anything like it. Not at Langston, not from someone like Marcus. By first period, the video had racked up over 500,000 views. Local influencers were reposting it. An education blog published a short article titled, "Is America Ignoring Its Geniuses in Uniform?" CNN's morning segment flashed the footage in the background as anchors debated what it meant for education equity. Inside the school, reactions fractured fast. Some students were inspired. They whispered Marcus's name like he was a myth. Come alive. A few left handwritten notes outside the janitor's closet. "You are amazing. You showed them. Please teach us." But not everyone was impressed. A loud, mocking group led by senior Owen Chambers, a football player with legacy admission lined up at Princeton, started calling Marcus Mr. Mopius. They began posting edited memes online. Marcus's face photoshopped onto Einstein's body, holding a toilet plunger instead of a chalkboard. Their laughs were louder than ever in the hallways. Mr. Halpern didn't say much, but his demeanor changed. Subtle, at first. Quieter. He still wore the same smug expression, but there was something under it now. Something tight and rattled. During fourth period, when a student asked about the equation from the video, Halpern snapped. "Not everything you see online is real," he barked. "Let's focus on the curriculum." So when reporters began calling the front office, and when a few black parents demanded a meeting about the incident, Whitaker did what she had always done. She kept things quiet. She released a brief generic statement. Langston Prep values all members of its community and is reviewing the situation internally. We have no further comment at this time. But silence wasn't neutrality. It was fuel. Students began drawing sides. The whispers became heated arguments. Hallways that once echoed with boredom now buzzed with racial tension. Some white students mocked Marcus openly, defending Halpern and claiming the video was staged. Others, black, brown, and even some white allies, started a hashtag, "Let Marcus Teach." Alana James became its unofficial leader. Smart, sharp-tongued, and unafraid, she posted a long message to her 12,000 TikTok followers. "This isn't about calculus. It's about how people treat you when you wear a uniform. It's about how the smartest person in the room gets laughed at because he's black, because he's a janitor, because this system would rather he mop floors than teach. But you know what? He taught us something no one here ever has. Humility. That's real education." Her post went viral within hours. Meanwhile, Halpern grew increasingly paranoid. He started policing students' phones, banning any mention of the video in class. He filed a quiet complaint to the administration, alleging that Marcus had interrupted instruction time without permission. He claimed Marcus had created disruption and confusion among students. Marcus received a written warning. It felt like a slap across the face. That night, he sat in his small apartment off Cascade Road, letter in hand, rereading every word. It was the same language used by the institution that had buried him 15 years ago. Disruption, confusion, boundary violation. The same code words, the same weaponized politeness that always found a way to silence black excellence. He thought of calling Dr. Lockwood, the voice from the unknown number, that morning. He hadn't returned the call. He wasn't ready, because deep down, Marcus feared something he couldn't name. If he stepped back into the light, would it destroy what little he had left? But fate wasn't waiting on him. By Wednesday, graffiti appeared on a bathroom mirror. "Marcus is faker." By Thursday, someone anonymously slid a note under his supply closet door. "Stay in your place, or else." By Friday, tension cracked open into confrontation. It happened between periods. A group of students had gathered around Alana's locker, discussing plans for a sit-in. Owen Chambers sauntered by, smirking. Still trying to make your mop god a legend? He sneered.
Alana didn't flinch. Still scared of someone smarter than you?
Owen leaned in. I don't take lessons from janitors. Maybe he should stick to floors and leave math to people who earned their degrees. The hallway grew quiet. Marcus, walking by with his cart, heard it all. But he didn't stop. He didn't speak. His silence was louder than a shout. That evening, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of every member of the school board. It was short, direct, powerful. Subject: urgent investigation needed. Racial misconduct and suppression of talent at Langston Prep. This is not just about a janitor solving a math problem. This is about a white teacher mocking a black man in front of students. This is about the administration protecting the aggressor while silencing the victim. This is about a pattern. Attached video evidence, student testimonies, and faculty witness reports. You are being watched. Act accordingly. No sender. No trace. But the message was clear. As Principal Whitaker reads the email in her office, her assistant bursts in, face pale, voice shaking. There's a reporter from the Washington Post at the front desk. He says he's here for Marcus Ellison. The knock on Marcus Ellison's closet door was gentle but firm. Too deliberate to be a student. Too early to be routine. He opened it cautiously. A man in a trim gray suit stood in the hallway, holding a press badge from the Washington Post. His name was Corey Ames, and his eyes held the focused curiosity of someone who smelled the start of a bigger story. I'm not here to stir trouble, he said, but I need to know, how does a man solve that equation and end up cleaning floors? Marcus stared at him. Not with anger, not even surprise. Just a slow exhale that said, it's beginning. The anonymous letter had worked faster than anyone expected. Overnight, Langston Prep became a lightning rod for national attention. The video clip of Marcus solving the problem had already drawn millions of views. But now reporters were peeling back layers of a mystery no one saw coming. Marcus didn't answer Corey Ames's question. Instead, he closed the door. Quietly. Firmly. But outside that closet, the world kept turning. And now, it was turning toward him. Journalists flooded the school board's inboxes with requests for comment. Education advocates took to Twitter demanding Marcus be evaluated for a teaching position. Think pieces appeared online, with titles like, How Many More Marcuses Are Hiding in Plain Sight, and The Genius Beneath Our Feet. The more reporters dug, the more startling the truth became. Archived academic databases revealed a name that had once glowed with promise. Marcus T. Ellison, former PhD candidate at MIT, class of 2. His unfinished dissertation, titled Exploring Asymmetrical Dynamics in Multivariable Chaos Equations, was still available in a dormant research repository. The abstract alone had stunned math scholars. Complex, ambitious, elegant. It had the kind of depth that professors spent decades chasing. One retired math professor described it as a theoretical bombshell we weren't ready for. But the paper was incomplete. Abandoned. No one in academia knew why.
Now they did.
One investigative journalist unearthed court records tied to Marcus's expulsion case. Though sealed by MIT, a few redacted depositions painted a troubling picture. Accusations made without full review, anonymous reports of plagiarism, faculty disputes, and a suspiciously swift dismissal process. In short, Marcus hadn't just been failed, he'd been buried. Online forums lit up. Former classmates, colleagues, and even ex-professors began weighing in. Some admitted guilt. One anonymous poster wrote, I was there. Everyone knew he got railroaded. But no one wanted to be the one to say it. We let it happen. At Langston Prep, chaos rippled. Principal Whitaker called an emergency faculty meeting, her carefully curated professionalism now cracking under the glare of national scrutiny. Halpern didn't attend. He had personal matters to deal with. In truth, he was panicking. Because now people were asking questions about him too. And his answers were thin. Students started printing out Marcus's thesis abstract and taping it to their lockers. A few professors at Georgia Tech publicly offered to help him finish the dissertation, calling it a moral obligation. Alumni from MIT began tagging the school in viral posts demanding his record be revisited. Marcus remained silent. He didn't attend the protests forming in front of the school. He didn't respond to interview requests. He cleaned the cafeteria after lunch just as he always did, pushing his cart past walls lined with portraits of white scholars and benefactors. But silence wasn't enough to protect him anymore. That evening he stood by his kitchen window, sipping weak coffee, when the call came. The voice on the line was gruff but familiar. Marcus? The man asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. His grip tightened slightly. It's Dr. Lockwood. Gerald Lockwood. A long pause. You're the last person I expected to hear from, Marcus finally said. Dr. Lockwood cleared his throat. I know, but I should have called years ago. He was once Marcus's supervising faculty before things fell apart at MIT. He hadn't defended Marcus publicly back then. Too many career risks. Too many politics. I've watched everything, Lockwood said. The video, the news, and your thesis. Marcus, it's finally getting the attention it deserved. Experts are calling it ahead of its time. Marcus looked down at the calloused lines in his hands. You didn't defend me then, he said, his voice quiet. There was a silence between them. Heavy, unfinished. I'm retired now, Lockwood continued, but I have connections at Emory, at Stanford, even Princeton. They want to talk to you. They're not offering a mop. They're offering a classroom. You could lecture, publish, finish your work, get the title you should have had. Marcus closed his eyes. The words should have felt triumphant, but they landed like bricks. Why now, he asked. Because the world finally cares? No, Lockwood said. Because I finally do. For a moment, Marcus felt the past folding into the present. His younger self, full of fire, reaching through time toward a man who had been forced into silence. I need to think, he said quietly. I'll wait, Lockwood replied. But not forever. When the call ended, Marcus sat in the stillness of his apartment, heart pounding. He didn't cry. He didn't celebrate. He just stared at the folder on his bookshelf. The one labeled Ellison, Thesis Draft V. He hadn't opened it in over a decade. But the world was opening it for him now. The next morning, a hand-delivered letter appeared in Marcus's custodial mailbox. It was sealed in embossed gold. From the chancellor's office at MIT. The message inside was short, typed in bold. We would like to formally invite Mr. Marcus T. Ellison to complete his doctoral thesis at MIT under full scholarship. Immediate reinstatement pending acceptance. Please respond within 72 hours. The invitation sat on Marcus's desk for 2 full days before he touched it again. The letter from MIT was folded and placed neatly beside it, unread since that first glance. But the embossed envelope that now held his attention was from Georgia University's Department of Mathematics, one of the top public programs in the South. Its sender, Professor Gerald Lockwood. Just a question typed in Lockwood's terse academic voice. Would you consider speaking as a guest at our graduate seminar on the evolution of nonlinear analysis in real-world applications? The students know your name now. And frankly, they deserve to hear from the man behind the math.
No camera crew, no press, no spectacle.
Just a room full of minds and a chalkboard. Because this wasn't about intellect. It was about identity. If he said yes, it wouldn't just be a lecture. It would be stepping into a room full of educated, mostly white academics who had already drawn conclusions about him. It would mean peeling back the layers he had worked so hard to hide beneath. And it would mean standing tall in the same posture he had once been punished for. The next morning, Marcus took the train to Georgia University. He wore a simple, ironed shirt, no tie, no suit. He didn't want to appear as someone he wasn't. Not anymore. Lockwood met him at the building's side entrance. The professor looked older than Marcus remembered. His hair was fully white now, posture more stooped, but his eyes carried a tension, something like guilt pressed beneath determination. I don't expect forgiveness, Lockwood said plainly. Good, Marcus replied. I didn't bring any. Lockwood gave a faint smile, then opened the door. The seminar was being held in a mid-sized lecture hall. Tiered seating, 2 long chalkboards. It was meant to be casual, an intellectual conversation, not a performance, but word had spread. The room was packed beyond capacity. Graduate students lined the aisles. Professors hovered near the back. Even a few journalists, posing as visiting academics, took notes. Marcus could feel the eyes on him before he stepped onto the small platform. Some were curious, others skeptical. A few, plainly dismissive. One whispered, "That's the janitor, right?" Lockwood stepped up to the podium first. "This is Marcus Ellison," he said without a single embellishment. "Some of you know his story, some of you only know the gossip. What you don't know is what he's capable of. He's agreed to walk us through a theoretical model many of us have studied, but never quite cracked." Then he stepped aside. Marcus didn't go to the podium. He went to the board. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the shifting of bodies, phones clicking into silent mode. Marcus picked up a piece of chalk. His hand hovered over the black surface for half a second. Then it moved. He didn't just write equations. He told a story through symbols, functions, graphs. The board became a map of chaos theory, of real-world unpredictability, of how human systems and mathematical logic collide. He didn't lecture the way they did. He didn't quote books or name-drop theories. He just worked, line after line, until a pattern emerged from the mess. And then he paused, turned to the room. People think chaos is failure, he said, voice calm. They think it means something broke. But really, chaos just means the system is too complex to see clearly at first. Sometimes we're not lost. We're just misunderstood. The room was silent. Then came a slow, deliberate clap from the back row. Marcus looked up, and his breath caught. Standing near the exit, arms folded, was Ryan Halpern. He wore a sport coat now, no tie, a pressed shirt, but the expression was the same. Smug, unreadable. Watch. He clapped twice, then stopped. Lockwood frowned. You know him? Marcus nodded once. We work together. Halpern stepped down 2 rows. Well, isn't this something, he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. The janitor lectures now. A few professors shifted uncomfortably. Marcus didn't flinch. The board is open. You want to add something? Halpern smirked. No, I'm just here to observe. Always interesting to see who academia props up these days. A few students exchanged glances. The tension was thick now, dense enough to taste. Marcus turned back to the board. I'd like to finish the model, he said simply. He kept going deeper now, more complex layers building off the initial proof, until even the skeptical students leaned forward. Some began taking notes. One raised her hand to ask a question. Others simply stared, their earlier doubts fading line by line. But Halpern's presence never left the room. He stayed the full hour, watched as Marcus completed the entire framework, answered questions, and then with quiet dignity, set the chalk down and returned to his seat without applause. He had come to reclaim something. Later, as the crowd filtered out, Lockwood approached Marcus. You did more than prove the model, he said. You just made a lot of people very uncomfortable, in the best way. Marcus didn't answer. He was still staring at the back row, where Halpern had stood. The chair was empty now, but Marcus could still feel him watching. That evening, a faculty blog from Georgia University posted a photo from the seminar. In the background, partially obscured, a blurry figure stood watching the board intently. The caption read, Brilliant guest lecture by Marcus Ellison, Future of STEM Education. Why is a janitor from your school lecturing at a university without certification? Marcus sat on the edge of his twin-sized bed that night, fully dressed, staring into the dim shadows of his apartment, as if the answers to his past might materialize from the walls. The day's lecture replayed in flashes, chalk in hand, equations flowing, the buzz of intellectual curiosity, but one face kept interrupting the film reel in his mind. Ryan Halpern. Marcus hadn't recognized him immediately. The man had aged, thinner hair, deeper lines, softer jaw, but the eyes hadn't changed. Cold, calculating, watching not to understand, but to measure. Marcus didn't know what he was looking for when their eyes met during the lecture, but what he saw in Halpern was unmistakable. A quiet, simmering rage, cloaked in condescension. And now the pieces were clicking into place. Marcus hadn't thought of MIT in detail for years. Not like this. Not with clarity. The hearings, the betrayal, the swift dismissal. It had all become a fog he learned to live around. But in that haze, one memory came back sharp now, like broken glass underfoot. A closed-door faculty meeting. He was called in, forced to sit as professors questioned his work, his process, his ethics. One by one, faculty members gave vague statements, some neutral, some suspicious. But one man stood out, a graduate teaching assistant, who had only recently been assigned to the math department's academic integrity board. A man who claimed he had overheard Marcus discussing the plagiarized draft with another student. A man who suggested that Marcus had, in his words, admitted to cutting corners. Marcus felt the nausea rise in his chest like acid. Back then he'd thought the name was familiar, but he had never made the connection. MIT had buried it all under formal process, and he had been too stunned, too broken, to dig into the detail. Until now. The next morning, Marcus entered Langston Prep's faculty lounge, for the first time in 6 years. Not to clean, to look. The room was quiet, Empty. Teachers were in class. The walls were lined with framed photos, staff yearbooks, gala snapshots, award dinners. Marcus moved carefully, scanning the images. Then he saw it. A 209 photo from a regional academic conference in Boston. A group of smiling scholars, wine glasses raised in celebration. In the back, almost in profile, but clearly visible, stood Halpern. The photo's caption, Emerging Voices in STEM Education. Marcus stepped closer. Right next to Halpern stood Dr. Gaffney, his old advisor, the same one who hadn't returned a single message during the scandal. And just behind them, barely visible, was the edge of a whiteboard, with scribbles, equations, notes from Marcus's abandoned thesis proposal. He stared at it long and hard. Proof, not just of presence, of involvement. The revelation felt like salt rubbed into a wound that had never properly healed. And yet, there was something worse. Something more insidious. Halpern had known. He had known who Marcus was. All along. From the very first day they crossed paths, in Langston's hallway. From the first time Marcus wheeled a mop cart past room 207. The snide jokes. The dismissive tone. The public humiliation. It hadn't been random. It had been personal. Halpern had buried Marcus once. And now he'd been mocking him, while Marcus cleaned the floors beneath his feet. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. This wasn't just about race. It wasn't just about jealousy or academic elitism. It was about erasure. Halpern hadn't just wanted to see Marcus fall. He wanted to ensure no one ever remembered Marcus had risen at all. Marcus thought of the students. Of Alana. Of the ones who had started whispering, "Let Marcus teach." Of the ones now questioning their teachers, their textbooks, their school's legacy. He had been buried once. But now the truth was surfacing, uncontrollably, unstoppably. Still, Marcus didn't want revenge. He wanted reckoning. The next morning he walked into Langston Prep, not as a janitor, not as a guest lecturer, but as a man fully aware of the story that had been written over his life, and ready to take the pen back. Marcus didn't blink. You should ask MIT how long they plan to extend it. Halpern's jaw tightened. But Marcus had already moved on. In the faculty lounge, he returned to the photo on the wall. This time, he didn't just look. He carefully took out his phone, snapped a picture and emailed it to himself. Beneath it, he typed a single sentence. Academic integrity starts with remembering who was in the room. He CC'd the message to the superintendent. But none of it stopped Marcus from returning to room 207. After hours, he still cleaned the floor, still dumped the trash. But now, the students looked at him differently. As he mopped that afternoon, a student passed him a folded note. Inside, a hand-drawn sketch of the equation he'd solved weeks ago, this time with a note beneath it. You changed the way I see math. Thank you. Marcus folded it, placed it in his pocket, and returned to work. He had no idea what was coming next. That evening, as he emptied the lounge trash can, he noticed a folder had fallen behind the recycling bin. Inside, yellowed papers, notes from the math department, and a scanned PDF titled Student Hearing Testimonies, MIT 2009. The first page bore a name underlined in red, Ryan Halpern. Marcus held the folder in his hands like it might catch fire. The faculty lounge was empty, lit only by the blue-tinted light of a dying afternoon. Outside, students shuffled to buses and carpools, but inside that space, behind the vending machines, beneath decades of institutional dust, Marcus stood frozen in time. Student Hearing Testimonies, MIT. The first page was grainy, but the signature was clear. Ryan Halpern. In carefully typed paragraphs, Halpern had testified that he overheard Marcus discuss sharing thesis materials improperly. He'd called Marcus's behavior highly irregular, and though he admitted he had no direct evidence, he stated, "I felt obligated to report it for the integrity of the program." A professional betrayal, wrapped in academic language. Marcus didn't need more confirmation. He had it now, in ink, in print. Halpern hadn't just stood by while Marcus fell. He'd pushed, but he didn't rage. He didn't storm into Principal Whitaker's office or blast the files across social media. Marcus folded the documents, slid them carefully into his bag, and left the lounge without a word. Because outside those walls, something else had started. The whispers had turned into voices. The voices into slogans. The slogans into thunder. By midweek, students at Langston Prep had organized a formal sit-in, outside the administration building. What began with a few handwritten signs quickly exploded into a full-scale movement. Let Marcus teach. We deserve better. Halpern must go. The slogans echoed through the courtyard. Alana James, once silent in the back of room 207, had become the movement's face. Her live streams documenting the protest drew thousands of viewers. Local media outlets circled the campus. Parents called. Former students chimed in. The Washington Post published a second piece, From Janitor to Genius. The growing movement at Langston Prep. Hashtags trended nationwide.
Justice for Marcus.
Let him teach. Erase the erasure. But Marcus said nothing. He didn't speak at the protest. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't grant interviews. Instead, he registered for a math competition. It was an annual regional event hosted by the Southern Mathematics Initiative. A rigorous series of problem-solving rounds, logic challenges, and theory presentations. Competitors ranged from high schoolers to PhD candidates. It was known for its ruthless difficulty. Marcus entered under a pseudonym. MT. The initials were intentional. Marcus Thomas Ellison. A quiet nod to identity reclaimed. He didn't tell anyone. Each week, new rounds were posted online. Unmarked, anonymous submissions judged solely on accuracy and elegance. Marcus submitted his solutions on Sunday nights. After long shifts cleaning chalkboards and buffing floors, he advanced. Then advanced again. By the fifth round, whispers began spreading in the competition's online forums. One contestant, MTE, was submitting solutions so precise, so efficient, that several judges suspected they were from a university professor. Others speculated it was an international student, hiding eligibility. But no one guessed the truth. By week 6, MTE was leading the leaderboard. 5 perfect scores. 0 errors. One judge wrote, "This is the cleanest work I've seen in 2 decades. Whoever this is, they're not just good. They're historic." Principal Whitaker faced calls from both sides. Angry parents accusing her of letting race politics hijack the classroom, and civil rights lawyers hinting at lawsuits. Halpern stopped coming to campus. Rumors said he was on leave. Others said he was quietly negotiating a resignation. Students, meanwhile, refused to back down. Classrooms were empty. Hallways rang with chants. One morning, the front entrance was covered in sticky notes. Hundreds of them, each scrawled with messages. "You inspired me." They laughed because they feared you. "Teach us, Mr. Ellison." Still, Marcus stayed silent. Until one morning, Lockwood called.
Have you been watching the competition? He asked.
Marcus was already reading the leaderboard. They added a new judge for the finals. Lockwood said. Marcus's heart slowed. Who? Lockwood paused. Ryan Halpern. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, of course, the final round was to be held in person. A single problem. 3 hours observed live. No calculators. No notes. Just pure brain power. And Halpern would be one of 5 judges watching. Marcus didn't flinch. He registered officially. Used his real name. When his submission was confirmed, the math community online exploded. MTE was revealed. The janitor genius had entered the final. The day of the competition, Georgia University's lecture hall brimmed with anticipation. The audience included students, professors, journalists. Even a small camera crew from PBS arrived to film a segment on hidden geniuses of American education. Marcus entered alone. He wore a pressed button-up, gray slacks, no fanfare, no entourage, just a leather notebook tucked under his arm, and a steel calm in his eyes. He took his seat at the long table in front. Contestants were given whiteboards, markers, and a sealed envelope containing the final problem. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the proctor gave the word. Marcus opened the envelope. He studied the problem. A multi-layered proof involving topological mapping and entropy compression. A beast of logic and abstraction. He smiled and began. His hand moved with quiet speed. No theatrics. No hesitation. Every mark was deliberate, precise. The audience watched in silence, mesmerized. At the back of the room, Halpern stood beside the judging panel. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, narrow, searching, never left Marcus. As the timer ticked past 90 minutes, other contestants faltered. Some stopped writing, others stared blankly at their boards. But Marcus kept going. By minute 35, he boxed his final answer. The solution was flawless. One of the judges leaned over to whisper something. Another nodded slowly. A murmur spread through the room. Halpern didn't move. Marcus looked up, met his eyes, And for the first time, Halpern looked away. As Marcus handed in his whiteboard and turned to leave the stage, the lead judge approached the microphone. "Before we announce the winner," he said slowly, "one of our judges has submitted a formal challenge to the solution. He believes plagiarism may be involved." All heads turned. "I believe this work is not original," he said, "and I request immediate review." The room held its breath. For a few seconds after Halpern's words landed like a thunderclap, time seemed to freeze. The crowd murmured in confusion. The other judges shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stood silent at the front of the room, whiteboard still in hand, shoulders squared, not in defiance but in clarity. Halpern's voice was steady, but the strain behind it betrayed his motives. "The structure of the solution resembles a proof published in a now-defunct European journal 15 years ago," he continued. "There are similarities worth investigating." One of the judges, a bespectacled woman from Stanford, narrowed her eyes. "You're suggesting plagiarism?" "I'm suggesting the solution is too perfect," Halpern replied. "And as someone who's seen this man's background, I feel obligated to ensure the integrity of this competition." Marcus didn't move. His expression didn't shift. But in his chest, something began to burn. Not anger, not even surprise, just a familiar ache. The ache of being measured not by brilliance, but by the biases buried in other people's fear. A pause. Then Marcus stepped forward. His voice was quiet but carried to the back of the room. "Would you like me to solve another?" he asked. The panel exchanged glances. "I'm not here to impress anyone," Marcus said. "But I came here under my real name. I didn't hide. I didn't ask for validation. I came to do what I love. If someone wants to question that, I won't walk away. I'll solve anything you put in front of me, and I'll do it twice." It wasn't defiance. It was resolve. One judge leaned over and whispered to the event chair. A decision was made. To neutralize the accusation without dismissing it outright, the panel announced a new challenge. An impromptu problem selected and submitted by the judges themselves. No contestant had seen it. No time to prepare. Halpern's hand shot up first. "I have a problem," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from his satchel. It was a problem he'd written himself, designed not for brilliance, but to humiliate. Eventually they relented. The board was wiped clean. The room hushed once more. Marcus stood alone, in front of the crowd. The problem was posted, and immediately, the murmurs began. It was a beast deliberately convoluted, combining elements of stochastic matrices, recursive functions, and paradox loops. A maze with no clear solution. A theoretical snarl that hadn't been seen in open competition before. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's a trap." Marcus stepped closer to the board. He stared at it, not blinking, not moving, for nearly 2 full minutes. The silence in the room became unbearable. Halpern folded his arms, waiting for the fall. Waiting for the moment, Marcus faltered, just as he had at MIT, just as he had been forced to do under pressure, so many years ago. But then, Marcus lifted the chalk, and he began. Slowly, he unpacked the equation, not from its front but from its tail. He approached it backward, isolating contradictions and assumptions embedded in the logic. He annotated each layer with notes that dismantled the false walls Halpern had built. Within 20 minutes he had untangled the problem. Within 40 he had it solved. But he didn't stop. He picked up a second piece of chalk and turned to a clean section of the board. "I'd like to offer an alternative solution," he said. The judges stared. So did Halpern. Marcus began again from a completely different angle. This time he used a method involving entropy distortion principles, an approach so abstract that even some of the professors leaned forward to follow the logic. The solution didn't just work. It was elegant, economical, pure, and unlike anything published. A stunned hush fell over the room. Then came a gasp. From the back row, one professor from MIT, who had attended quietly, without speaking, stood up. "This second method," he said, voice tinged with awe. "I've never seen it applied like this." Marcus nodded. "That's because it hasn't been. I worked on this in 2008, but it was never published." Now the attention shifted fully, undeniably, to Marcus. Halpern stepped forward again, trying to regain footing. Anyone could claim a method is unpublished, but the MIT professor cut him off. "No. I recognize parts of this. This was from Ellison's original thesis draft, the one our department suppressed." A shockwave. Halpern froze. The other judges turned. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered furiously into their phones. And Marcus? He simply lowered the chalk and stepped away from the board. I didn't come to prove anything to him, he said softly, nodding toward Halpern. I came to prove something to myself. The silence cracked. Applause erupted. First hesitant, then people stood. Even the judges rose. The competition chair stepped forward, shaking Marcus's hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the microphone. I think it's clear we're not just witnessing a solution. We're witnessing a correction of history. Halpern disappeared before the awards were announced, but Marcus didn't look for him. He stood under the stage lights, accepting nothing more than a modest medal, a certificate, and a crowd's admiration that felt heavier than any award he'd ever dreamed of. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the wings of the stage. She wore a dark blazer, ID badge clipped to her lapel. Dr. Celeste Monroe, National Mathematics Institute. Mr. Ellison, she said, extending her hand. My name is Dr. Monroe. I'd like to speak with you privately, if you have a moment. Marcus blinked. Of course. She led him to a quiet side hallway, away from the crowd, her heels clicking against the tile. I was in the audience, she said. We followed your story, your work, and we're not the only ones. Marcus nodded politely, unsure what was coming. Dr. Monroe smiled faintly. We're offering you a full research fellowship at the National Mathematics Institute, she said. Complete freedom to finish your thesis, publish, teach, lead. Any program you want to build, we'll fund it. Marcus was stunned. Why me? He asked. She didn't blink. Because you're the kind of brilliance this country buries, and it's time we start unearthing it. As Marcus shook her hand, his phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line. Urgent Langston Prep Staff complaint. Immediate response required. Sender Ryan Halpern. The body read, if you don't walk away from all of this, I'm gonna release everything. Every file. Every sealed report. I'll destroy you this time completely. Marcus Ellison sat in the back of the city bus, head tilted against the vibrating glass. The world outside blurred by speed and fatigue. The applause from the competition was still echoing in his ears. The medal sat quietly in his satchel, next to the research fellowship paperwork from Dr. Monroe. He hadn't signed it. Not yet. But there wasn't much time. On his phone screen, the email from Halpern glared like a threat dipped in arrogance. I'll destroy you this time completely. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even professional. But it was very real. Marcus knew how these things worked. Institutional racism rarely came wearing hoods anymore. It wore tailored suits, wrote memos, and threatened reputations in plain, coded language. And when the coding didn't work, it sent fear straight to your inbox. By the time he reached Langston Prep the next morning, the atmosphere had shifted. Teachers avoided eye contact. Students whispered more cautiously. The front desk secretary barely acknowledged his presence. It was subtle, like a storm pressing against the windows before the first raindrop falls. Then came the meeting. Principal Whitaker summoned Marcus to her office. Her tone was flat, her eyes tired. There's been an influx, she began. She turned her monitor around. An open folder labeled Parent Complaints, Ellison. Dozens of emails. Lines of bold text, some in all caps. We're turning this school into a circus. Why is a janitor suddenly a role model for my child? Langston's standards are being compromised for media attention. Marcus stared at the screen. Not angry, not surprised, just disappointed. Whitaker rubbed her temples. Some are demanding you be removed from campus, temporarily at least. Until things calm down. Removed, Marcus repeated. Her voice dropped. Marcus, the board's getting pressure. Sponsors, alumni, even the press. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't about the truth. It was about optics. Again, always. Outside the building, protesters still gathered. Students with signs that read, "Let genius teach," and he solved what they feared. But inside, the walls were closing in. The local news had gotten nastier. A conservative Atlanta talk show aired a 5-minute segment titled, From Mop to Math, Is This Really the Future of Education? The host chuckled as he called Marcus a custodian turned fraud, mocking the competition results, accusing the Math Institute of woke posturing. National papers covered the story with more tact, but still carried undertones of disbelief. Janitor Genius raises questions about equity and elitism. Custodian's calculus shakes up status quo, but for how long? And then came the hate mail. Typed letters, handwritten notes, Emails with burner addresses. Dozens of them. Affirmative action failure. Stick to the mop, boy. You're a fraud and we know it. One envelope had no return address. Inside was a torn-up printout of his thesis abstract. Marcus read every line, every slur, every veiled threat, not because he believed them, but because he had to know what he was fighting against, and how deep it still ran. He sat alone in the maintenance closet, the only space still his, surrounded by cleaning supplies and silence. The metal chair creaked beneath him. The letter from the National Mathematics Institute was still in his hands. He had 48 hours to sign. If he did, he'd be leaving Langston Prep, leaving the students. Alana, the growing movement, the protest, the proof that change could happen in the same building where he was once invisible. If he didn't, he stayed in a place trying to choke him again, where progress felt like borrowed time. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Alana. They're scared of what you make us believe about ourselves. That we're more. Don't let them win. Marcus exhaled slowly. That night, a black SUV pulled up to Marcus's building. A woman stepped out, powerful, composed, unfamiliar. She held a folder in her hand and knocked on his door. Mr. Ellison, she said calmly. I'm from the Department of Education. We've been watching everything, and we need your help, urgently. The woman at Marcus Ellison's door was calm but commanding. Her name was Carla Benton, Regional Director for the U.S. Department of Education's STEM Equity Initiative. She wore confidence like a fitted blazer, and carried herself like someone who rarely heard the word no. We've been following everything, she said, holding out a sealed folder. Your work, your voice, your reach. You've done more in 3 weeks than some entire districts do in 3 years. Inside the folder, a formal offer to join a national panel of STEM advisors, full relocation to Washington, D.C., and a 6-figure salary. It wasn't just a job, it was access, legacy, power. You'd have influence, resources, a national platform, Carla said. You wouldn't just be changing your life, you'd be changing education at its core. Marcus read the letter in silence. It was everything he'd once dreamed of, everything he had once begged for, back when he still believed the system could be reasoned with. And yet, as the words blurred on the page, his mind wandered to faces, students at Langston, laughing between classes, arguing over equations, staring at him with respect instead of ridicule. He didn't give Carla an answer that night. Instead, he walked to the edge of his modest apartment complex and stared out over the neighborhood, sirens in the distance, broken street lamps flickering, but also laughter, life, resilience. And just beneath that, the weight of knowing if he left, who would fill the gap. The next morning, Marcus didn't sneak into Langston, through the back. He walked in the front doors. Reporters flanked the sidewalks. Protesters held new signs. He deserves that classroom, not just a janitor. Ellison over everything. Inside, the auditorium buzzed. Principal Whitaker stood near the stage, prepared to announce what everyone assumed was inevitable, that Marcus was leaving. But before she could speak, Marcus stepped forward. He took the microphone. The crowd silenced instantly. I've been offered positions across the country, Marcus began, his voice steady. Institutes, think tanks, national education councils, life-changing roles. Roles I never even dared to imagine someone like me would be offered. He paused. The weight of every eye in the room pressed down on him. And I'm turning them all down. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Marcus continued. Not because I'm afraid, not because I don't think I'm ready, but because I remember being the kid no one saw. I remember believing I had something to offer and watching the world pretend it didn't matter. He held up a folder. This is a proposal for a new STEM program. Right here, at Langston, free of charge. Open to every student who's ever been overlooked. Robotics, calculus, coding, engineering. Not just taught but empowered. Not just served but seen. He turned to the students. You don't need to leave your neighborhood to matter. We don't need permission to build brilliance here. Cheers erupted. Some students stood. Alana James wiped tears from her face. News stations blasted the announcement nationwide. Ellison declines national role to stay local. A janitor who stayed. Marcus Ellison chooses community over career. Donations poured in. A GoFundMe page hit $30,000 in 48 hours. Alumni from historically black colleges offered mentorship support. STEM nonprofits reached out with free curriculum offers. Even MIT professors emailed in private, asking how they could help. But inside the walls of Langston, the temperature dropped. 3 days later, Marcus was summoned to a meeting with the school board. The conference room smelled like politics, coffee gone cold, polished mahogany, forced civility. Superintendent Dorian Mills sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 board members, all white, all conservative in posture, if not in party. Mr. Ellison, Mills began, we reviewed your proposal. It's strong, one board member added, as if delivering a compliment with tweezers. Unnecessary, Marcus replied. Mills nodded slowly. We recognize that, but after careful consideration, due to ongoing budget constraints and liability concerns, we cannot officially endorse or fund the initiative at this time. Marcus's jaw tightened. Liability? He asked. Well, another board member chimed in. You're not credentialed. Legally speaking, putting a non-licensed individual in a teaching leadership role. I was invited to help design national education policy, Marcus said, voice sharp now. But I can't teach algebra to a sophomore. It's not personal, Mills offered. Marcus stared at him. Of course it is. He stood, calm, firm. This school let a man mock me in front of students, covered for him, punished me in silence. But now that I'm being celebrated, you're scared it reflects badly on you. Marcus gathered his folder. I won't ask again. I'll build it without you. He walked out before anyone could respond. And just like that, Langston made its choice too. But destiny wasn't finished with Marcus. Outside the boardroom, as he reached the janitor's wing, a fellow custodian, a soft-spoken man named Reggie, called his name. Hey brother, he said, handing Marcus a plain envelope. This was slipped under the supply closet door, said it was for you. No return name. Marcus opened it. Inside, a handwritten note. They might control the budget, but they don't control belief. Build it anyway. Below it, a cashier's check for the signature at the bottom shocked him. Renee Whitaker. Marcus stared at the check in disbelief, just as his phone buzzed. A text from Alana. You might want to check the front lawn. Something's happening. He stepped outside and what he saw next stopped him in his tracks. Dozens of students and parents setting up tents, tables, and banners, launching the first ever pop-up Marcus Ellison STEM Academy, right on Langston's front lawn. Marcus Ellison stepped through Langston Prep's double doors and froze. The front lawn, normally a stretch of manicured grass bordered by neat hedges and a wrought iron fence, had been transformed overnight. STEM for all. We are Marcus. If the system won't teach us, we'll teach each other. Dozens of students were present, some in uniform, others in street clothes. Many were from Langston, but Marcus recognized a few from neighboring public schools, even community colleges. Parents had brought chairs. Local activists handed out flyers. Someone passed around a clipboard labeled community volunteers, mentors, tutors, donors. This, she said, gesturing to the impromptu setup, is what education looks like when we stop waiting for permission. The crowd roared. Marcus stood motionless, unsure whether to smile, cry, or simply breathe. Alana spotted him, smiled, and raised the megaphone again. And the man who made this possible, who showed us that brilliance can wear work boots, is right there. Dozens of heads turned. He tried to step back, tried to vanish into the brick, but it was too late. Cheers erupted. A chant rose. Marcus! Marcus! He raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement, but stayed where he was, watching, because he didn't need the spotlight. The moment wasn't about him. It was about what had awakened. The walkout happened at 10 a.m. sharp. Students poured out of Langston's classrooms in waves, ignoring the PA announcements and teacher warnings. They didn't shout or vandalize. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was disruption enough. Dozens of them, black, white, Latino, Asian, stood silently in the hallway with signs taped to their backs. Genius doesn't need a title. We learn more from the janitor than the math book. Our silence ends today. By noon, the media had arrived. Reporters lined the sidewalk. News vans parked on the grass. Live streams shot from every angle. Langston Prep had become the epicenter of a national reckoning. Civil rights groups showed up within hours. The Southern Coalition for Equity in Education held an impromptu press conference on the lawn. A local pastor delivered a prayer calling Marcus proof that God puts brilliance where the world least expects it. Even a few retired Langston alumni returned in quiet support, ashamed they hadn't seen the injustice sooner. Still, Marcus remained in the background. He spent the afternoon tutoring a group of freshmen beneath a shade tree, walking them through a basic physics problem with nothing but chalk. a slab of concrete, and a piece of string. When one of the boys got the answer right, he lit up like he'd just won the lottery. And that, Marcus thought, is what a classroom should feel like. As dusk crept in, a makeshift assembly formed near the flagpole. Someone handed Alana a microphone, connected to a small speaker. "I want to say something," she began, "about what this has meant to me." The crowd hushed. "I almost dropped out of Langston last year," she said, voice trembling. "I was 1 F away. I kept telling myself I didn't belong here, that smart wasn't for girls who looked like me." She turned, gesturing to Marcus. "Then I saw him solve that equation. And not just solve it, but do it after being laughed at, dismissed, erased. He didn't get loud. He didn't get angry. He got brilliant. And for the first time, I believed I could be brilliant too." She paused, wiped her cheek. "You didn't just change my GPA, Mr. Ellison. You saved my life." The silence afterward was heavier than applause. Even Marcus, stoic, practiced in years of emotional restraint, felt his knees go weak. He turned away for a second, inhaling sharply. He had spent years mopping floors. Others walked across without notice. Now the next generation stood for him. And then, like every twist in Marcus's story, it happened. Elijah Cross, billionaire founder of one of Silicon Valley's most powerful education software companies. The anchor leaned forward. "Mr. Cross, you've just watched live coverage from Langston Prep, where a grassroots STEM movement is being built from the ground up. Do you have a reaction?" Elijah nodded slowly. The anchor blinked. "Care to elaborate?" Elijah reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I'm sending a message right now," he said, "to Marcus Ellison." The screen zoomed in on the phone's display. One message typed and sent live. "How much do you need?" Elijah smiled faintly. "That's an open checkbook. I built my company because a teacher once saw potential in me when no one else did. Marcus Ellison saw potential in an entire generation, and I'm going to make sure he has what he needs to build them a future." Back at Langston, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen. One text. "Unknown number. Name your price. Build your school. Let's make history. Elijah Cross." As Marcus looked up from the message, Alana sprinted over, breathless. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He says you knew him from before." Marcus turned and froze. Standing at the edge of the crowd, wearing an MIT hoodie and holding a manila folder, was Jared Lee, the former doctoral student, whose actions once helped bury Marcus's academic career. "We need to talk," Jared said, his voice heavy. "It's about what really happened." Marcus stared at Jared Lee, stunned. It was like seeing a ghost step out of the worst chapter of his life. Jared looked older, tired, but there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I should have said something back then," Jared began. "I should have told the truth. I'm sorry." Marcus said nothing. He didn't trust his voice. "I'm the one who copied your thesis notes," Jared confessed, holding out the manila folder. "I left them on a shared drive. Halpern found them before the hearing. He told me if I kept quiet, he'd make sure I got a recommendation. I was young, scared. I did the cowardly thing." Inside the folder were dated files, emails, digital signatures, all proof that Jared had stolen Marcus's work, and Halpern had known. Real evidence. 15 years too late. "Why now?" Marcus finally asked. Jared swallowed. "Because I saw that live stream, and I saw my own daughter watching it. I couldn't keep lying, not with her seeing what truth looks like." Marcus took the folder, heavy in his hands. 3 days later, Marcus stood on a new patch of land, leased with funds from Elijah Cross's tech foundation. What had started as a pop-up protest was now a construction site. Temporary buildings were erected, outfitted with projectors, lab tables, and laptops. Whiteboards lined the walls. The sign above the gate read, "The Ellison Institute for Applied Math and Innovation." Classes launched within 2 weeks. Dozens of students enrolled. Some had been expelled from other schools. Some had been labeled learning delayed. But under Marcus's guidance, they thrived. He refused to lecture from a podium. He sat among his students, chalk in hand, kneeling beside them to sketch ideas in the dirt when tech failed. They worked on real problems: water filtration systems, traffic algorithms for Atlanta intersections, solar panel conversions for low-income homes. By the end of the first month, students who once failed algebra were now solving college-level calculus. A 14-year-old girl named Kayla built her own AI chatbot. A boy who had never passed a math test developed an algorithm to track food waste in school cafeterias. News crews returned. But this time, Marcus didn't shrink. He stood before the cameras as a mentor, not a janitor. And behind him stood an army of students, rewriting their futures. Marcus began training new tutors. Young black men and women, many of whom had been written off by other systems. They returned to their communities not just as instructors, but as word spread fast. Harvard requested Marcus submit a paper for review. Stanford offered him an honorary doctorate. And then came the biggest shock of all. MIT published his old thesis, this time with an official apology. Marcus Ellison, once expelled in shame, was now cited in academic journals worldwide. He didn't host a press conference. He didn't make a speech. He walked into the first class after the announcement, set his coffee down, and said, "Let's start with the unsolved problem from last week. Anyone want to take the lead?" Because it was never about recognition. It was always about the math and the kids. Ryan Halpern was suing him for defamation. The claim: Marcus had slandered his professional reputation through unsubstantiated accusations and public embarrassment. The lawsuit requested $5 million in damages and an immediate injunction against Marcus's ongoing public engagements. It was an attempt to silence him. Again, as Marcus stood on the steps of the courthouse, legal notice in hand, a familiar voice approached from behind. "You're not fighting this alone." It was Jared, flanked by 2 lawyers and a news crew. "I'm testifying. On record. Let's burn the whole lie down." The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood, the kind of place where justice was supposed to live, but often only visited. Marcus Ellison adjusted his blazer collar as he stood in the hallway, outside courtroom 4B. The folded subpoena rested in his pocket, but the weight on his shoulders was heavier than paper. He had faced chalkboards, cameras, even entire institutions, but nothing quite like this. This was a legal battleground. This was the same system that had erased him once, giving him a second shot at truth. Inside the courtroom, the benches were full. Reporters packed the back rows, pens poised. Students and supporters from the institute sat quietly, some holding signs that said, "We believe Marcus, and truth can't be sued." Halpern entered surrounded by a team of attorneys, in sleek suits. He looked calm, too calm. As if the courtroom was just another classroom where he controlled the narrative. His lawsuit accused Marcus of defamation and willful character assassination, citing the national coverage, the public lectures, and most damning, Jared's confession, which had gone viral after a TV interview. Halpern's legal team argued that Jared's statements were coerced, and that Marcus had manipulated public opinion through spectacle and falsehood. They wanted $5 million in damages and a public apology. The judge, an older black woman, with silver-streaked locks, named Judge Marlene Dorsey, opened the trial with a sharp gavel strike.
No cameras, no outbursts, and no theatrics,
she warned. "We're here to separate fact from fiction, not to put on a show." Halpern's lawyers went first. They brought up Marcus's expulsion from MIT, laying it out like a crime story. Old documents, sealed statements, speculative interpretations. They painted Marcus as an unstable figure, obsessed with vengeance, eager to relive his trauma through public spectacle. "He's not a teacher," one lawyer said, turning to the jury. "He's an opportunist, a failed academic turned social media hero." Marcus sat expressionless. Then it was his turn. His legal counsel, an articulate, composed black woman named Attorney Diane Lattimore, stood up and calmly dismantled their claims. Yes, Mr. Ellison was expelled from MIT, but what they failed to mention is why. Hearsay, circumstantial speculation, and administrative cowardice. No direct evidence, no due process. Then she brought out Jared. The courtroom shifted as Jared walked to the stand. Cameras outside clicked wildly. Jared didn't flinch. He told everything. The plagiarism, the threats, Halpern's manipulation, the recommendation letter, offered in exchange for silence, the guilt, the collapse of his own career. "I was afraid," he said, voice cracking. But Marcus never raised a hand. He never retaliated. He just disappeared. And that silence haunted me, more than anything. Lattimore asked gently, "So why speak now?" Jared looked over at Marcus. "Because I realized silence was violence, and I won't be part of it anymore." The courtroom was still, but the case wasn't over. Next came a procession of expert witnesses, professors from MIT, Stanford, and Georgia Tech, who reviewed Marcus's thesis work and testified under oath that his ideas were not only original but groundbreaking. One even stated, Halpern would have needed 10 more years of study to understand the math Marcus was writing in. The momentum shifted. Then came the twist. A surprise witness, a young woman in her early 20s called by the defense. Her name, Trina Mosley. She stepped up to the stand, a former Langston prep student. Quiet, nervous, but determined. I was in Mr. Halpern's class 2 years ago, she said. I used to get A's in math until that class. Then suddenly I was failing. She described how Halpern had mocked her pronunciation during oral presentations, dismissed her questions as elementary, and once told her in front of the class, maybe STEM isn't your lane. She paused, then said clearly, I was the only black girl in the room. Lattimore leaned forward. Did you report this? Yes. But nothing happened. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution tried to object. Judge Dorsey overruled them. By the time closing arguments came, the air was electric. Lattimore stood before the jury. This case isn't about defamation. It's about domination. It's about a man who tried to erase another, not just once, but twice, because the truth was too inconvenient. Because a black man's brilliance threatened the illusion of control. She paused. But truth has a way of surviving erasure. Sometimes it waits in janitors' closets. Sometimes it hides in chalk. And sometimes it walks back into a courtroom, with its head held high. The jury retired. Minutes passed. Then hours. Marcus sat beside Diane, eyes closed, trying to breathe past the nerves. Halpern sat still, his lawyers whispering behind him. Outside the courthouse, crowds had formed, waiting. Then, finally, the jury returned. The courtroom stood as Judge Dorsey asked, Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman nodded. In the matter of Halpern versus Ellison, we find in favor of the defendant. Marcus closed his eyes. A breath escaped, quiet, heavy, long overdue. But the foreman wasn't done. We further recommend a formal investigation into Mr. Halpern's professional conduct at Langston Prep, and ask the court to forward transcripts to the state licensing board. Judge Dorsey raised her eyebrows slightly. That's not binding, but it will be noted. Gasps erupted again. Halpern's jaw clenched. He stood suddenly too fast, knocking over his chair. This is absurd, he barked. Judge Dorsey slammed her gavel. Mr. Halpern, you are out of order. But the noise outside drowned them all. The courthouse doors opened to reveal hundreds cheering. And as Marcus stepped out into the crowd, a chant rose, not angry, but triumphant. From mop to mentor. As Marcus descended the courthouse steps, his phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. He opened it. A single line. Your daughter was watching. She wants to meet. Attached was a photo of a teenage girl, eyes like his, standing beside a woman he hadn't seen in 17 years. The courtroom door clicked shut behind Marcus Ellison, and for a moment, the world outside roared like it had been holding its breath for years. He had walked into that courtroom with a past that nearly destroyed him. Now he walked out with a verdict that changed everything. Within 24 hours, news of the decision swept across the nation. Major outlets ran headlines like, Marcus Ellison wins defamation trial in landmark case against systemic silencing. From accusation to acclaim, former janitor proves the power of truth.
Halpern discredited.
STEM world embraces Ellison. The licensing board moved swiftly. In an unprecedented decision, they stripped Ryan Halpern of his teaching credentials, citing abuse of academic influence, racially discriminatory behavior, and historical misconduct. Langston Prep formally terminated his contract the same day. There was no appeal. Marcus, meanwhile, was awarded $2.1 million in damages. He didn't keep a cent. Instead, he called a press conference, not in a hotel ballroom or on a cable news set, but on the steps of the Ellison Institute. Standing beside him were 10 of his brightest students, holding binders of scholarships, each smiling like they already saw their future unfolding. I'm donating every dollar to the students this country forgets, he said. Let's not call it damages. Let's call it seed money. He created the Marcus Ellison Opportunity Fund, aimed at providing full scholarships to underprivileged students pursuing STEM degrees. Within a week, additional donors matched his gift, and the fund tripled in size. MIT sent a formal apology again. This time it was printed in their alumni newsletter and shared in their commencement ceremony. Stanford invited him to keynote. Georgia Tech asked him to design a course. Harvard offered to publish his lectures as a digital series. Everywhere Marcus went, lines formed, Not for autographs, but to ask questions. Real ones. About logic. About identity. About rebuilding after ruin. He didn't travel like a celebrity. He traveled like a teacher. And everywhere he went, he said the same thing. There are more of me out there. Don't ask how I got lucky. Ask who's being ignored. Langston Prep, under immense public pressure and a wave of resignations, began a reform process. Principal Whitaker, whose quiet donation had helped spark the Institute's physical foundation, was named interim superintendent. One of her first acts was to announce a historic renaming ceremony. Langston's STEM wing, once named for a wealthy donor who had never stepped foot in a science class, was getting a new title, the Marcus T. Ellison Center for Innovation and Integrity. The dedication day arrived. Under a clear Atlanta sky, students, teachers, parents, and media packed the lawn in front of the building. A temporary stage was set, flanked by a sleek new plaque. It read, "Dedicated to those who refuse to stay erased." Marcus stood in a gray suit, not flashy, just clean, and waited for his name to be called. Whitaker, standing at the podium, cleared her throat. Some people rise despite the system, others rise and change it. Marcus didn't just teach math, he taught us all a new formula for justice. Applause erupted. Marcus took the stage. He looked down at the students, many of whom had once been told they weren't gifted, weren't ready, weren't enough. "I used to think redemption was about proving people wrong," he said. "But it's not. It's about helping the next generation prove themselves right." As the crowd stood to cheer, his eyes caught movement in the back corner. A figure. Marcus froze. Time fractured. He stepped off the stage, heart pounding. His body moved toward her before his mind could catch up. When he reached her, he couldn't speak at first. She looked up at him. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," he whispered. "I saw you on the news," she said. "I figured it was time." Marcus nodded. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." She shrugged, eyes glistening. "Mom kept you away. Said you left. But I've been watching. You didn't leave everything." Marcus blinked fast. "Your name? I changed it. But it used to be Janelle." He breathed out. "Janelle?" A long silence stretched between them. Then she held out a folded piece of paper. He took the paper, opened it. It was a poem. Simple, honest, sharp. He was the janitor. They never saw the spark. But I saw it from a screen, and it lit up the dark. They tried to erase him, to bury the truth. But numbers don't lie, and neither does proof. He folded it back carefully, gently, like it was made of glass. "I don't want anything from you," she said quickly. "I just wanted to see you be great. And you are." Tears hit his eyes before he could stop them. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. They stood there, father and daughter, two strangers bound by legacy, both learning how to belong again. A staff member ran up, breathless. "Mr. Ellison, urgent email from the White House. They want you in D.C. next week. The president wants to talk STEM reform, and she wants you to lead the initiative." The email came with a presidential seal and a simple subject line: "STEM Reform Leadership Meeting. Urgent." Marcus Ellison read it 3 times before he could breathe. He sat at the edge of his modest desk at the Ellison Institute, watching the cursor blink below the signature of the White House Chief Science Advisor. Below that, a handwritten note from the president herself. "You turned a mop into a microphone. Let's make the whole country listen." The invite wasn't ceremonial. It was a seat at the table, real policy work, curriculum planning, infrastructure grants, national rollout. And at the center, Marcus's voice, no longer ignored, no longer erased. But that meeting was in 7 days. And first he had something far more personal to attend to. He sat with Janelle, his daughter, for the first time in over a decade at a small cafe near the campus. No cameras, no pressure. Just 2 cups of coffee and years of silence that had finally cracked. They had spent the last few days texting, walking the grounds of the Institute, exchanging stories like puzzle pieces. She didn't ask for apologies, only truth. And Marcus didn't offer excuses, only memory. "So," he asked softly, "what do you do now?" She looked up from her drink, a small smile playing at her lips. "I teach," she said. His breath caught. "Math," she added. "Public high school. Title I school in Memphis. Not glamorous, but," she shrugged, "feels like something that matters." Marcus stared at her. "You became a math teacher," he said slowly. "And I didn't even know." She nodded. "You weren't around. But Your name still was. The news. The trial. The equation video. I used to watch your lectures in secret. Tried to figure out why I always liked numbers even when I hated what they reminded me of. What did they remind you of? He asked. She looked him in the eyes. You. There was no malice, just truth. Raw and delicate. But now, she added, they remind me of me. Marcus reached for her hand. She let him take it. The reconciliation wasn't clean. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in its own way, it was enough. Days later, Marcus stood in front of Langston Prep's new STEM wing, his name carved into the archway, but his heart focused on the students streaming in through the doors. It was his first official day teaching again. This time, as a recognized educator, not a janitor, not a guest, a teacher. The classroom was packed, cameras lined the walls, but Marcus ignored them. He didn't come for spectacle. He came for the board. He picked up a piece of white chalk, looked at the students, some nervous, some curious, a few starstruck. He smiled softly. My name is Marcus Ellison, he said. You may have heard a lot of things about me, that I was a janitor, that I was expelled, that I shouldn't be here. He turned to the board and drew a single equation, elegant, dense, yet strangely graceful. He paused, turned around slowly. Sometimes the most powerful solutions come from the ones they tried to erase. The room was still. Then, like a match to dry wood, applause ignited. Some students stood, others wiped away tears. Teachers in the back clapped. The camera crews, even those instructed not to speak, couldn't help themselves. Clicks and flashes filled the room. Janelle stood in the hallway, watching through the glass panel in the door. She didn't cry. She just smiled. It was a smile of arrival. Outside the school, reporters prepped their nightly headlines. Microphones were tested. Segments rehearsed. And then in a final beat that rippled far beyond the classroom, CNN's breaking news banner lit up. Janitor educator nominated for National Medal of Science.